I really like the Red Corsairs. First of all, as a concept, loyal space marines driven away from the Imperium by bureaucracy and taxes, who can't relate to that, and turned into marauding renegades, touched by chaos, even though not fully blown demon possessed. And that brings us to the second point, because that means their sculpts are not as over the top down in details and trims. And if you are regular to this channel, you know how much I hate that. There's some guy in the Eye of Terror whose entire job is just hammering extra trims onto Trader Astartes, condemned to an eternity of needless decoration.
By will of the Dark Gods, this armor requires 800% more fancy borders.
So I thought about getting the release box, just like I did with the Emperor's Children back in the day. That was a fantastic box, and what I enjoyed about it was rather similar to what I like here. It's chaos, but without too much detail for the sake of detail, and instead coming with a clear design idea behind it. But while the Emperor's Children box was made from all new models, the Maelstrom box is mostly existing models, Legionnaires and Chaos Terminators with upgrade sprues, and only one new unit, the Raiders and of course the Reave Captain. And while these look really cool, like I said, I just love that ragtag design direction so much, all of them wearing different marks of Space Marine armors, or at least different elements of them. If I really wanted to get them, I could always wait for the standalone release. I do, however, have massive amounts of Chaos Space Marines lying around already, and the very idea of this faction just being made up by all kinds of defectors from different chapters and different time periods made it almost a no-brainer to kitbash and build a Reave Captain and Raider squad myself instead. Sorting through my pile of opportunity, I returned with my Emperor's Children box because it had more minimalistic and sleeker armor design. Kill Team Nachman basically had a Legionnaire sprue with some extra weapon options, and Eldritch Omens has a ton of over-designed Chaos Marines, but also came with some interesting bits that would make great additions for scavengers like these. I also brought out some Space Wolves because, let's face it, they're basically heretics, and I wanted to use some Mark III and Mark VI elements to throw in here and there, so I also grabbed these. And finally, Kill Team Morok's Phobos sprues had some sneaky infiltrator bits like smoke grenades and grappling hooks that would come in handy for a pirate faction. I started the first Raider from an Emperor's Children body, as these would kinda pass a slightly larger Mark VI. I just had to get rid of all the Slaanesh iconography. Usually that means cutting and scraping it away with a knife and then smoothing it out with sandpaper, so the finish is closer to how the plastic comes out of the mold. Or clipping away larger details like the flask and the syringe. I also wanted the chest plate to be bigger and smooth, so I could strap some bandoliers on later. The Eldritch Omens box had some really cool weapon options. Most of their designs stood out from what you usually get with the standard Legionnaires, and all of these raiders are wielding bolters, bolt pistols and close combat weapons, so I grabbed the chainsword for this guy. This is how it looked all cleaned up, and now it was time to add to it. First making the chest plate bigger, and then after finding that a wider stance would work better, I opened the arm a little more than would be possible by just gluing plastic on plastic. And for that I wedged a ball of putty between the two pieces after adding a drop of super glue on each side. This would need some detailing still, but it had to cure before that, so I wouldn't mess up the alignment by pressing where I shouldn't. These guys have tatered drapes all over, so I rolled out a sheet of modeling clay cut in shape and placed that as a loincloth. I made sure the sheet was wider than you'd initially think would be appropriate, so I could squish it together a little, which would look more credible and cloth-like. For that I fixed it in place on one side and then started folding it up, creating a nice fold pattern. Stuffing it under the blade, and once the rough shapes were done, I refined everything with my color shaper. A little bit of inside baseball here. Usually I will create one big fold that attaches in one place, like in the upper left corner here, and then shape all the smaller folds around it, making it look like the corner that attaches tucks at them and creates the typical V-shapes. Last but not least, I make sure the way the whole cloth piece flows complements the movement, and that's this part done. Most raiders have a smaller shoulder pad on the right shoulder, and spoiler alert, I've been using the ones from the Emperor's Children box on all of these conversions. I just had to get rid of a few details here and there to make them simpler and less Slaanesh-y opulent. I grabbed the bolt pistol arm from the regular Legionnaires to finish the pose on this one, and after refining the bellows joints on the arms, I could go ahead and attach the shoulders. And like I said, I wanted this to look like Mark VI armor, so I added one of these stubbed pauldrons from the Horus Heresy Mark VI Marines on the left side. And it only made sense to give them a beaky helmet too. In hindsight, I wish I picked one from an older Mark 7 kit, because these horse heresy minis are a bit smaller than 40k Marines, so the helmet looks a little tiny. And I'm not 100% done with this one yet, but let's move on to the next one for now. I grabbed the Legionnaire body for this one, picked the pose that I liked, and grabbed the back side of the upper body that would fit with the front. And then I took a front plate from a Mark 3 sprue. The plain chest and dangling armor plate would look really great here, and also very similar to the one from the new Raiders. First I cleaned up the legs again, mostly getting rid of the overly spiky trims and the sculpted skull on the knee, making an effort to keep the angle at that particular part of the armor just like on the other knee, to make it look a lot more interesting during the painting later. And once cleaned, I glued the back of the torso and the legs together, checking how I could fit the front plate into the picture. Turns out I'd have to cut away a lot of the front, but as I started to chip away, I realized I wanted to keep that star ornament for later. So I removed it carefully, cutting around and behind it. Eventually I had cut away enough to make the chest fit, but the lower plate was kinda misaligned. So I separated it, carefully cutting below the skull and turning the part around constantly and chipping away at it with small cuts until it came loose. I cleaned the parts up a bit and then moved on to fixing the front plate to the body. It wasn't a perfect fit, so I stuffed the inside with some milliput, which would allow aligning the two halves properly and also holding them in place. The front plate is a little smaller, and you could definitely leave it like that and it would mostly look fine, but my OCD kicked in and I evened out the size differences with some putty before moving on. Snipping off that neck guard following the front angle made that whole area look super coherent, by the way. I really like how that's turned out. The one-handed axe from the Eldritch Omens box was the perfect fit here, and I liked how it supported the weight shift of the pose. A straight pistol arm also was the only choice here, and at this point I think I like this mini already the best out of the bunch. Again, I added a shoulder pad from the Emperor's Children box. They just have the perfect size, the cutout makes them look similar to the shoulders, sculpted for the actual Raiders, and the spikes on this add some extra drama. And since I went with the Mark III chest plate, I also added a Mark III pauldron on the shoulder. Next, I wanted to start from something that could pass as Mark 7 armor. So I dug into the Legionnaire sprue again and picked this one that had the typical abdominal patterns, but also already had a loincloth I could work with. I did get rid of the more chaos-centric details and quickly whipped up a more neutral midsection, building a knotted up belt from Putty. And then, because the cloth looked a bit flat, I also added more dramatic folds again. I'm kinda trying to replicate a similar pose to this guy from the Raiders box. So I grabbed a smoke grenade hand from the Phobos kill team and a bolter from the Emperor's Children Legionnaires that looked really similar. And both of these were really great fits. I did have to do some scraping to make the shoulders fit, but that was definitely worth it and they slotted right in. With the poses locked in, I wanted to give them a bit more pirate flair, which of course means cloaks. So again, I rolled out thin sheets of putty between some baking paper and cut it roughly into the shape I needed, attaching it to the chest piece and pushing them in shape. I'm making sure to make them as wavy and dramatic as possible, pushing in hard direction changes with my tools, bending them upwards like they're flowing in the wind or to show movement. But the problem is, in order to manipulate the cloaks this way, the putty has to be uncured, which means once I'm happy with the shapes, I have to prop them up somehow so they don't sag. And here I use these V-shaped pieces of wire where I blue tacked on one of the arms to the legs and then made sure the cloak could rest on the other arm to support the shape I needed. And having them sit in the apex lines of the individual folds helps a lot not to distort the big idea. And usually I need about 2 of these supports to make everything work. Of course, now I had to wait until the rough shapes were cured before I could continue to detail the cloaks, so I picked out a couple of heads and helmets meanwhile. Ironically, the Space Wolf sprues had some really fitting heads to offer, really close to that slightly emo mohawk cut the Red Corsairs heads would come with. And these cloaks are supposed to be ripped and tattered, so once they were properly cured, I sketched the rough shapes I wanted to cut away with a pointy pencil and got to work with my new rotary tool. And that is the F2 Master, made by the multiple product design award winning company Fantic, who kindly agreed to sponsoring this video. This little tool is just perfect for mini nerds like you and me. I use it in almost every one of my hobby projects, while converting minis obviously, cleaning up 3D prints, or creating my own tools for sculpting or kitbashing, and honestly whatever else comes up in the house. Now this is a very handy tool, but can we also just appreciate the way that this is engineered? Everything is stored in this sophisticated aluminum case, and it's holding and protecting the tool and the 35 bits it comes with. And when you need them, they simply pop out in this very satisfying way. And when you are done, you can just put them back and store this right at your workplace without taking up too much room. As you can see on screen, it's just invaluable when I need to shave off a millimeter of plastic quickly and in a controlled way. Getting rid of details I don't want. Drilling out barrels is easier than ever. I don't even have to create a guide hole for the drill with the needle, because this is so precise, and it's also handy when I'm creating some initial shapes on these cloaks, or while building bases and plinths. The F2 Master comes cord-free with an easy-to-use bit changing mechanism, seamlessly integrated speed control, and a front-facing LED for precise operation. Unlike these other more unwieldy tools we all know, it has a sleek body for easily handling, which makes it the perfect tool for us miniature enthusiasts when we have to maneuver in tight spaces. It's 30% quieter than comparable products and has a 25,000 RPM max speed with 5 adjustable speed settings to choose from, helping you find the perfect mode for grinding, polishing, cleaning, cutting, engraving, and for 3D print finishing. And the best thing is, if you follow the Amazon link in the description and use my coupon code on screen, you can grab an extra 50% off to save a total of 38% on the Fantic F2 Master, which means you can grab the most valuable hobby tool around for the most competitive price ever. Thanks to Fantic for sponsoring this video. And now back to our Red Corsairs. Once I had everything drilled and carved out the way I planned it, there was one last thing to do. To finish out the cloaks, I placed a few smaller folds in between the larger ones I already laid out, and mostly trying to make it look like the cloth was conforming and wrinkling around the features that connect to the backpacks. And speaking about backpacks, I made sure to match them with the corresponding armor marks. I even dug out an old Space Marine kit to source a Mark 7 backpack. The Red Corsairs upgrade sprue have a few of these bandoliers and would definitely make for a reasonable upgrade for this. But I remembered that the Krieg sprues had a few of these bullet belts I could use. So I grabbed these along with a few pouches and grenades, and I pressed it all into a fresh strip of putty I placed on the chest of my Mark 6. And I also added that star bit I saved earlier, as these guys seem to be quite the prolific trophy collectors. So here's the thing about this faction. Everyone knows the basics: Huron Blackheart, the Bad Up War, Big Rebellion, lots of paperwork related heresy. But what happens after is what is more interesting to me. Because the Red Corsairs aren't really a legion. They might look like one, they've got the numbers, the ships, the firepower, arguably getting close to something like the Black Legion in sheer scale. And they definitely make for a formidable threat to the Imperium in the lore to drive some of these narratives. After all, a baton can't be everywhere. But while the Black Legion is a war machine, the Red Corsairs are a business. And businesses, especially profitable ones, attract all kinds of characters. You got ex-loyalists, chaos sympathizers, deserters, opportunists, and even Xenos. And no matter who you are, you raid well, you get rewarded. You survive, you stick around. You don't? Well, someone else gets your armor. And this is exactly why I enjoy Red Corsairs so much. You got mixed armor marks, looted gear, improvised repairs. Basically anything you do and add will find some form of justification in their background. And then it was time to build the big guy, the Reave Captain. They are basically taking the place of Chaos Lords in a Red Corsairs army, essentially also having the same stats in-game too. And they can choose between a Power Maul and the Power Sword, and they also get the option for a Plasma Pistol. They also can be seen wearing what looks like a warped and corrupted Iron Halo. Personally, I really like the Mace option and the corrupted Iron Halo, and knew just the bits I needed to build my own. So I got the Power Mace as well as the trophy rack from the Eldritch Omens Legionnaire sprue. I also wanted to go with patches of fur on the shoulders this time, so I started from the body of a Space Wolf's head taker. Not only are they highly into fur themselves, they're also Primaris Marines, which makes them stand taller, just like the original Reave Captain model does. This model also had a loincloth already, so that would save at least one step. I assembled everything but the arms and then started hacking away until he was stripped of most of his Space Wolf iconography. I definitely wanted to keep the plate belt though, and I knew exactly what I would put there later. So I cleaned that area, smoothed it out, and kept the outer shape intact. Of course, Primaris armor is very distinct, sculpted with additional armor plates and characteristic details, so all of these had to go. I made the upper legs completely smooth and cut down the extensions on the knees, and then scraped away the articulation part, turning this more into one long shin guard instead. There was a lot of fur on this sculpt, and I guess he could just keep it like that, but not me. Extra work for very little payoff is just my thing. So I started hacking away at the fur. A smarter person would have just used the Fantic tool, but hey, old habits die hard, and you know we don't do smart on this channel. The cloak was also massive, and I decided to cut it down in size, starting on the left side, so I could also use a plain shoulder pad on this left arm, to later be able to plop a Tyrant's Claw decal on. I also reattached the hip protectors, as I figured if I cut them into a more aggressive shape, they'd actually be quite fitting. And speaking about, I also cut the foot armor into the typical Chaos patterns, starting by carving the top plate into the classic golden McDonald's arch, and angling the front plate. That was a bit of work, but probably still faster than sculpting it from scratch, and it's just so fitting. And last but not least, I basically shaved down the complete lower leg into a smooth cylinder and filled the gaps with some putty too. Then gluing the back side, I finally knew this would come together nicely. I gave the shin guards the typical trim, pressing on rolls of putty and then pressing them flat with my color shaper, gradually building the whole trim and then forming it into an L shape, creating a recess I could later sink rivets into. And I also added small sheets of putty to the loincloth and the cloak on the back to make them longer. And while this was curing, I went back to the plate belt. I wanted to sculpt the Tyrant's Claw on there, so I pressed a good amount of putty on, flattened it out, and started to cut it in shape. First building the rough outline of the fist, and then carving in all the fingers one by one, taking the fist on the real Reave Captain as a reference. And when that was done, I pressed in a little ditch in the lower part and added a tiny ball as a rivet. At this point, I also carved down the hip guards, like I mentioned earlier, to be more in line with the more aggressive shapes of these Pirate Space Marine suits, and I think it works really well. I had to do a little adjustment on the mace arm so my pose would work, and then I pinned it in place. Then I covered the joint in the usual way, stuck a ball of putty into the Mark III pauldron that I wanted to use and placed it down. While I left this to cure, it was time to work on the backpack with the warped iron halo. For the sake of variety and to make this captain a bit more impressive, I used one of the Legionnaire backpacks. Also, the exhaust spheres being further apart simply would offer more room to mount it. And I tried to figure out what I had to do to fit this on properly. I wanted the halo to be at least a half circle, ideally more, so I had to elongate both sides somehow. So I flattened the ends and drilled a tiny hole into each of them. I also drilled corresponding holes into the backpack and then bent a piece of aluminium wire in shape using a proper set of pliers. Once everything was glued in place, I covered the wire in putty and sculpted a shape to match the initial shape of the trophy rack. Once that was cured, I hacked some dents and lines into the putty to make it look banged up and weathered. I used a plasma pistol from the Legionnaire sprue, and it conveniently fit really snug right under the original pauldron, and that was an unexpected easy win. And then again, I used a Space Wolf's head that would fit perfectly after getting rid of the braids and some of the extra hair, as well as putting some sandpaper to the elongated canine teeth. As a last detail, I added rivets to the leg trims, simply pressing on small balls of clay and pushing them in place with a hard tool. And then I also gave this one a belt running across his chest, pressing on a heraldry shield and some pouches while it was still soft. I built a few tactical rocks for them to stand on and dumped some superglue and backyard dirt on the base, and that was the conversions and kitbashing done. Now, some of this really takes a while, mainly stuff like making sure the cloaks are wavy and look like actual cloth and not just a slab of putty, and of course waiting for everything you just sculpted to cure before you can work on the mini again without completely obliterating the work you just put in. But as always, working on them as a batch makes all the difference, and I really like how these turned out. I love that I have a unique squad that no one else has. I still need a few more, but I still have to make up my mind with what I want to do with the rest of them. I guess since the Mark III version is my favorite of the bunch, I'll probably do some more like him. Anyway, let's jump into the painting, and I'm not gonna lie, this scheme is just so much fun to do. So after priming the mini black, I paint all the armor highlights with the airbrush. This technique has been made popular by El Miniaturista, and it's a form of pre-shading because I essentially build all light and shadow before adding color. And I'm not gonna lie, for army painting this is exactly what I would do because it's so fast, you have so much control over your highlights. It's just such an amazing effect, and the result still looks like you spent 30 hours on blending all the transitions. So as you can see, I built a relatively wide main highlight and then a smaller secondary light on most of the elements. There is no right or wrong here. You can study some cylindrical shapes with different materials and surface properties to see what makes sense for you. But this approach just always works for me. I'm not leaving too much black because my goal is to have a rather bright red armor in the end, and I'm spraying on white Liquitex ink mixed with Kaleido airbrush thinner, about 2 parts paint, 2 parts thinner, and I start from 20 psi, but I will manually turn down the pressure on my air valve here on the quick release of the airbrush depending on whether I get some spider webbing, and I'll turn it back up if there is too much dry tip. You get the idea. Airbrush settings differ so much depending on brand, thinner and paints you're using, ratio of your mix, compressor type, and so on. If I ever find the time, I will make an airbrush video covering all of these realities of airbrushing, and I'm probably calling it the airbrush explained by an airbrushader. Because yes, for me the airbrush is mainly a tool, a way to get results. It's not my favorite way of painting at all, but nothing beats its effectiveness, and god damn it, just look at these results. And just because it comes up now and then, no airbrushing does not have to be expensive, and you can make it work with a small budget and even in a tight space. So I'm glad I found the gallery airbrushes because my Mobius here just feels so much better than any of the $200 high-end airbrushes I tried. It's so much more comfortable, easier to clean, and feels just as premium. And all of that for a fraction of the price. If you always wanted to get into airbrushing but didn't want to risk the investment, I will leave a link to the Mobius and the budget compressor in the description. You'll get 10% discount even on top of existing discounts, and it supports the channel at the same time. Next up, I'm going to highlight all the edges I want right in the end result, anything facing up especially, and where I want to maximize contrast, like on the feet down here. I'm just going through the motions, mostly doing the typical heavy metal edge highlights, like all these typical inverted highlights, framing the shin guards, for example. Then I'm blasting the whole mini with a coat of gloss varnish, and once that was dry, I mixed a little black oil paint with white spirit and let that run into the recesses to create shadows and the distinction in these areas. You can see the capillary effects do their magic, and shading this way we avoid any ugly spills, because even if we do get some stains on the white, that's easily cleaned off with a makeup sponge and some thinner. Then comes the fun part, seeing everything fall in place when I airbrush on the transparent red color. I'm using a mix of Blood Angels red contrast paint and Pyrrole red by Liquitex, which results in this intense red armor color that looks like $1,000,000. This gives a slight satin result, which you can leave as is if you are not bothered by it. Personally, I'm adding a coat of matte varnish before I move on with the highlights though. And for that, I'm mixing Lugonath Orange with an orange ink, just because this harmonizes so well with the main color. And I just emphasize some edge highlights a little more, and I give some highlight areas a bit of a specular highlight too, like on the pauldron here, and where I want to maximize contrast, like these small dots on the hip guards. I quickly gave the trims a coat of pure black before going back in with a dark brown. And here I started from a mix of speed paint medium and burnt umber ink, and I applied a wash in the recesses of the trims and also the head of the power mace. I followed this up with a wash of brighter red browns to simulate some rust collecting around the rivets and in the recesses, and then dry brushed the edges with rubber black by AK. This perfectly sets up a last dry brush with steel metal. On the trims, instead of giving everything the same edge highlights, I randomly run my brush across the edges, making it look like chipped paint over metal. This gives a really cool contrast. On one hand, we get very bright highlights on a dark base color, but obviously this metallic paint also reflects light, giving it an extra layer of intensity that makes it stand out. And because the weapon was missing some of that intensity, I also did the same on some of the edges I already dry brushed with metallics. Again, this looks really cool against the dry and dusty recesses. I started the loincloth from a beige mixed with burnt umber, so I could use the pure beige as a highlight color, and I just blocked in the major highlights, focusing more on higher areas. Then I added a very light blue-gray and went even brighter, also adding thin scratches and texture, mostly on the lower parts to make these parts a bit more detailed. Then I mixed extra dark green with a little burnt umber, which makes for that olive tinted shadow color, and adding some speed paint medium makes the result really smooth. And I also gave the inside of the cloak a very similar treatment, only keeping it a little darker. I'm giving these beige areas a few last highlights before I painted the outside of the cloak a dark blue and adding highlights with desaturated turquoise. The idea is to build texture using more of a flayed brush, and that way I can cover a lot of area using a stippling motion and building highlights at the same time. I gave the fur a base color of turquoise mixed with burnt umber, which gives this slightly greenish gray. I washed this with a bright blue-gray and then dry brushed the tips by adding black to the base mix. I prefer to paint fur this way nowadays, going from bright colors in the recesses to dark ones on tip of the fur, just a bit of a fresh take on the subject, I guess. I highlighted up the leather parts by adding more and more beige and then washed it with burnt umber and black for that distressed leather look. 2 dark gold layers were enough for the plate belt. If there was still some black shining through in the recesses, that was okay. I would wash this with turquoise anyway for a bit of a weathered brass look. I highlighted this up with tinted gold as usual to bring some shine back and added a brighter turquoise wash in more confined areas. For the backpack, I simply repeated most of the steps I already did on the rest of the mini, painted some rivets, added some more gold to the scheme and highlighted the black parts a little with the gray I already had on the palette. And then I worked on all of these trophies. First the skull, I got a simple gradient from a dark desaturated brown up to beige and some specular lights with my bright blue-gray. For the rotten head I used a greenish rotten flesh type base color that I washed with a bright magenta and then highlighted everything back up with a basic skin tone and a bright blue-gray to make sure the remaining skin would look pale. And for the Space Marine helmet, I decided on green. First of all, of course, because it would make for a complementary speck of color in relation to the red main color. And I also was thinking maybe this is a bit of a throwback to the Battered War origins. I used the smallest dry brush I had and added some dark green over the black base coat, leaving a tiny bit of black still visible in the recesses. I stippled on the green and would sometimes drag the brush to make the paint fade into the darker areas. Then I gradually went brighter and again started to stipple the paints to build the main highlights and then smudged the transitions a little for some blending. Also dragging the brush over the edges would create some highlights there. I repeated that 3 more times with brighter colors, in the end also adding a little yellow to make it look more grass green, again a little bit inspired by the main color of the Mantis Warriors. For the pistol, I had a glowing plasma effect in mind, so after I built some initial highlights on the black, I dumped white oil paint in the recesses. And when that was dry, I built a more consistent layer of white with the airbrush. At the same time, I added a little halo effect spilling over around the coils. I also dumped some white oil paint into the recesses at the front of the pistol and then covered the white with fluorescent red and chucked enamel fluorescent light orange into the recesses to round out the hot glow effect. Once that was dry, I ran my brush across the raised coils with a little red on it. That darkened them and made it look like they are cooling off in these places. For that last bit of credibility, I needed to add whites on all the adjacent edges and then covered it in fluorescent orange to simulate light reflecting off of these. This guy was anonymous long enough. Time to give him a face only Huron can love. So I built the main color from basically a bright magenta that I mixed from a dark skin color and red. And then I sprayed basic skin tone from above to define the main shapes and keep the saturation color in the recesses, the temples and so on. I added some extra dark green to the magenta, and these are complementary colors, so we have a bit of graying effect, which is what I'm looking for when I build shadows. I defined the eye sockets with this color and also added it around the jaw area and around the chin. I washed the raised areas with dark skin tones to build some depth there, and I also built a more color depth around the nose and temples with red, and then added a last highlight with blue-gray. The purple hair is base coated in Sigil burgundy, keeping some of the brighter areas that way, and then highlights it up a little more with skin colors for a few extra reflections. I carefully painted the eyes and teeth and made the inside of the mouth a bit more red. And then glued it in place. One thing I couldn't resist was getting a Red Corsairs decal sheet. Because freehands are fine, but let's be honest, I really like the gradients I built on the shoulder with the airbrush, and I did not want to screw that up. So I applied one of these runes to the heraldry shield on the chest and the tyrant's claw to the shoulder pad. And after all of that, I did mess the painting up regardless. A friendly reminder to always varnish before applying your decals. You could say now it's even more lore accurate, but then again, is Ceramide actually white? Do I really want to discuss this in the comments? Nah. So after I fixed that, a little matte varnish drew it all together, and it also fixed some of the shine left by the washes I used, like on the cloak for example. And then my Reave captain was finally done. And yeah, here they are, my little collection of completely legitimate businessmen. And this collection will definitely grow in the future. I think what I enjoyed most about this project is just how much freedom the Red Corsairs give you. Every model can tell a different story. Visually, I just love how the painting turned out. A mix of clean red armor, beaten up gear, trophies, and all those little mismatched details. It really sells that idea of a force that's constantly evolving, constantly looting and constantly surviving. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, my fellow pigment pushers. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.